This is the Bearcast, presented by Bird Culchin Ford. Bird Culchin Ford has been in Waco since 1936. Ford is the #1 selling truck in Texas 43 years running. The Bearcast is also presented by WellMed Medical Management and USMD Health System Dallas. Here's Craig Smoak and Grayson Grundhoefer.
Welcome in, everybody, to a brand new edition of the Bearcast on SicEm365.com and the Baylor Athletics on SicEm365 YouTube page. Thank you for joining us, whether it is live on Tuesdays at 11 a.m. or if it is after the fact on your favorite podcast mediums, including the YouTube page. Whenever you get around to listening to us, we do appreciate that. Welcome in. Tuesdays at 11:15. We are always live. Hit that like button, that subscribe button if you would. We appreciate that. I'm Craig Smoak, joined as always by Grayson Grundhoefer, both of SicEm365.com. Also, Garrett Ross behind the scenes producing as he works his magic and makes us sound good and hopefully look as best as possible as well. But a busy show to get to this week. Spring football is over, but now roster management really gets underway. Spring sports continue on as we get into the end of the month of April, so starting to wind down majorly when it comes to all of the spring semester stuff. That's starting to whittle down a little bit, so we'll talk a little bit of baseball and softball. And a lot going on when it comes to men's basketball and a brand new addition and possibly more that we will start off with today. And maybe another staff exit as well, which has been quite a constant this offseason, it seems like. But a good problem to have because it's just another sign of how attractive your program is and those that are a part of it. So, Grayson, a very busy week. We'll get into a big commit for Baylor men's basketball in just a moment, but you were at the spring game this past Saturday, just kind of in general as it all winds down and we start to transition into a new phase here. How you feeling?
Yeah, I mean, this was a very interesting week. I mean, a lot to talk about, a lot to discuss. You obviously had the spring game, which was really just another practice. They had a lot of competition, so got to see a lot of the quarterbacks and the receivers and the defensive backs, so that was nice to see. Obviously, recruiting side of things, it's pretty crazy right now with the transfer portal and all that. So really, I mean, just a lot to talk about. Basketball, transfer portal stuff too. It's been a very crazy week, honestly.
Yeah, and it's only Tuesday, so Who knows what the next, really 3.5 days have in store. And on the recruiting side of things for Baylor, some not so good news for their upcoming class. So let's just dive right into it and start off with men's hoops and the good news that came out of that program over the last couple of days as Duke transfer Jeremy Roach, one of the better point guards in the country, one of the better point guards in the transfer portal this go-round, entered his name this time a week ago into the portal, and very quickly Baylor started getting mentioned as a possible landing spot for him, and really strong kind of thoughts that he was going to end up at Baylor. You had Kentucky as they undergo their transition, Arkansas, Villanova, a bunch of other schools that were obviously interested in a 4-year guy from a program like Duke. But when all is said and done, he does, in fact, commit to the Baylor Bears. So all ACC third-teamer this past season, over 100 starts over 4 seasons in his career. McDonald's All-American a few years back. He's got a nice resume and a lot of experience, and he is going to be wearing the green and gold. So how big of a pickup is this to kickstart? And we know there's more moves to come, and there's a lot of rumors as to who could join him, but you got to get him officially in first, and that's what they did with Jeremy Roach. So how big of a deal is this for Scott Drew and the men's program?
This was pretty cool how immediate this all happened. I mean, it felt like Baylor was the favorite right when he entered the portal. Things actually, this was a recruitment that I felt like was pretty easy to cover. And I know he was on with y'all yesterday, and he kind of mentioned that it was pretty much Baylor from the very beginning of his quick, brief recruitment. This is huge. I mean, so I think I want to start with the fact why he's leaving Duke. I know a lot of people have this question. He played a lot of combo guard at Duke. They had Tyrese Proctor there. They've had good guards his entire time being there. So he wasn't always the lead point guard. And I think he wants to make that transition to being more of the lead point guard, which is what he's going to be at Baylor. I mean, you'll see maybe some Jaden Nunn. You'll see Rob Wright off the bench. But this is going to be Jeremy Roach's team at the point guard position, and I think he has everything to make that happen. You know, he's averaged right around a little over 3 assists each of the last 3 years, being a combo guard. So you know he can pass the ball pretty well. I think that number will jump up to probably 4 or 5 this year. But I think consistency, and the biggest thing with him is postseason experience. That's what I love the most. I mean, each of the last 3 years, Duke has made the NCAA tournament. They've advanced out of the first round all 3 years, and he's got a Final Four appearance and an Elite Eight appearance. That's huge. I mean, Baylor needs guys that have gone far in the tournament and have that kind of pedigree, have that kind of success, and have a bit of a clutch gene, which I do think Jeremy Roach has. There's a lot of things he does well. He shoots the three-point ball well. This year was kind of an outlier. He shot 43%. Previous to that, he was right around like a 34% three-point shooter. But if they're getting a 43% three-point shooter with his ability to get into the lane and draw contact and get to the free throw line, this guy's going to be really, really hard to guard. I know Ashley Hodges mentioned this, and I definitely agree. He's more built kind of like a James Akinjo, more like a Davion Mitchell, just the size that he has. I actually think he reminds me a lot of Kyle Lowry, who's been in the league for a long time. Just a thick body, not the tallest guy, not the greatest athlete, but a good shooter, can move the ball well, can score, and is just very strong, physical, and really takes pride in his defense, which is going to be a huge thing for him. He's going to be Baylor's best perimeter defender next year.
So pretty massive pickup, and one that moved very quickly, like you said, where he was in the portal. Baylor was apparently the favorite, and then just a few days later, a week later, a little less than a week later, actually, to be exact, he is officially in the fold. So Jeremy Roach, and I know Garrett pointed it out and others have pointed it out, the Raid, the bug spray, had a March Madness campaign, and they had 2 players that they had signed, and one was Dariana Littlepage Bugs, and she, of course, is of the Baylor women's basketball team. And then the other one was Jeremy Roach, who at the time was a Duke player, but now a Baylor player. So Raid, they'd only have to come to Waco, Texas to get their athletes out there. So a cool little combo, hopefully, for some NIL stuff in the future. I think that would make a lot of sense based on the fact that there's already something there to build off of now. But, really nice pickup, a lot of experience, makes the guard room look a lot better on paper heading into next year. I know there's still some things to figure out, but you're looking at, on paper, Jaden Nunn. You're looking at Langston Love. You're looking at VJ Edgecombe and Robert Wright III, both coming in as true freshmen. Things are looking okay there as far as the guards go. And how do you feel about sort of where that sits? And are you good with that moving on? I know there's obviously a big man out there from Tennessee, and Jonas Adu, who is the next big kind of target on the to-do list, and hopefully that's the next guy to pull the trigger for them. But you feel good about guards and kind of moving around. Where are you on the roster construction here with Jeremy Roach now in the fold?
Currently, I feel really good about the guards. I don't think they really need to add another one. I'd be okay if they did, though. If you wanted to add someone to give you kind of some Langston Love insurance, I guess, because he's been injured some. And so if you're able to bring in a guy who's more of a backup type, I don't see any reason why they couldn't if they have an open roster spot. But point guard positions filled, experience-wise, checks the boxes there with all the guys that they have. You have a high-level athlete in VJ Edgecombe who's going to be a lottery pick. We're going to talk about him in a minute, though, with the Alvin Brooks stuff, which we'll get to. And then Rob Wright, who kind of is the point guard of the future, I think, for this program. So feel really good there. Outside of that, you mentioned Jonas Adu out of Tennessee. He's got a decision coming up, but he's going to take, I think, a couple more visits, it seems like. I know North Carolina's involved, Kentucky, Arkansas, quite a few programs, but right now I do feel good that Baylor is the leader for him, and they desperately need a starting center of his caliber. Very good defender, solid on offense, really fits exactly what they need going into next year. The other visitor was Charlotte wing Igor Milicic. He was here last week as well. He's between Tennessee, Baylor, and Nebraska. I actually currently believe that he's going to choose Tennessee. So I think Baylor's going to kind of have to go back to the drawing board there at that forward position to replace Jalen Bridges, who announced that he's going to the NBA draft this week.
Yes, Jalen Bridges making it official. Not all that surprising that he decided to do so, but he did officially enter his name into the draft. So that was another piece of news from this week. So you can officially move on from the idea that he was going to return. I saw like little fleeting mentions of it, and pretty much thankfully the crowd was smart. Whenever it got brought up, that I saw at least, like the first response was always like, it's being ridiculous. He's not coming back to school. Great thought, but he's not coming back to school. So I don't think most people bought into that. I don't know, what that would have even looked like. It would have been just a shocker to see him come back. So not surprising that he does, in fact, declare for the NBA draft. So, yeah, that was another piece of big news from this week with Jalen Bridges, but a solid 2 years in Waco. Came in, did his thing. Was a nice player, and I think good teammate, all those types of things. So didn't get as deep as you would like to have with him on the roster, but certainly he had a role and seemed to really fit in well here. So best of luck to Jalen Bridges, and should be another guy that is added to the Scott Drew players in the pros list here in the relatively near future as that continues to grow. What also continues to grow is Scott Drew's coaching tree. That's been a constant now. It seems like the past couple of seasons we've seen John Jacobs and Jerome Tang, among others, go and move on and take head coaching jobs. But now looking at perhaps an unexpected clipping of the staff, and not for another head coaching transition, but Alvin Brooks III, a longtime assistant under Scott Drew. Talk about him possibly being linked to Kentucky, or at least some interest on the part of Kentucky for one of their assistant coaching jobs under new head coach Mark Pope. One of the Kentucky reporters out there, Kyle Tucker, mentioned that his father, Alvin Brooks III's father, was the director of basketball operations at Kentucky under Billy Gillispie, and so he would be a name to watch for that staff as that all comes together. So nothing official in this regard, but Alvin Brooks III is being talked about as a potential addition for the Wildcats. So that obviously would be pretty massive. He's heavily involved in a lot of different areas, and particularly recruiting. Has been a mainstay for a while now, and I know that he's got ties into a lot of these NBA guys that they've been putting out here lately, including VJ Edgecombe, Jacoby Walter, Keontae George. VJ Edgecombe, obviously, not in college just yet, but signed with Baylor. Keontae George, we know that he just came off a really nice year for the Jazz, and Jacoby Walter will be in the NBA later on this summer. So Alvin Brooks III, the threat from Kentucky, not the Scott Drew threat that we saw about a week ago, but here they are knocking on the door again, potentially. What are your thoughts on what would happen there if, in fact, that's to occur?
It's a very interesting situation, one where, when Scott Drew is being talked about as potentially going to Kentucky, a lot of that thought process was also that Alvin Brooks would be going with him, which I think seemed pretty obvious at that time. But now Mark Pope is reaching out and trying to get him to come to Kentucky as well. There's been a lot of rumors as to what Kentucky's offering, but it's very clear they value him. But I think it's also very clear that Baylor values him as well. And Baylor's going to do everything they can, I think, to keep him. Obviously, losing John Jacobs isn't great as far as, losing an experienced guy. But you also have to remember now you're not paying an experienced guy there as well. So you might be able to move some of that to Alvin. But we'll see. We'll see how that kind of plays out. I will say I know Kentucky fans are really excited about the prospects of potentially getting him to Lexington and then having him bring VJ Edgecombe with him because he was the lead recruiter. I've seen a lot of that on social media. I would say we'll see on that. I'm not exactly sure if that – I don't think that's necessarily a sure thing by any means if he does get the Kentucky job, but I do think it's something to monitor and something to look at as things progress. VJ's a really, really good player, really, really talented freshman. Would he want to move somewhere else even though he's been locked into Baylor for so long? And I think they even posted the tweet about him like a week ago about his signing, so not even that long ago. So it's an interesting storyline to follow, something that's been mentioned a lot and definitely something to keep on the radar. If they were to lose VJ Edgecombe, that does open up room to bring in more experienced transfer portal guys to potentially round out the roster. If they're able to keep him, then obviously you're kind of set to go at the guard position.
Yeah, it was seemingly a done deal last week, and then here you go with the rumors about Alvin Brooks and Kentucky. So suddenly that becomes a little bit of a thing once again. We'll continue to monitor that. Obviously, there is no better place for actual insider information on the basketball program than Sikkim365.com. So that is much like the Scott Drew situation, best to be handled over on the premium section if you want to dive into VJ Edgecombe, Alvin Brooks, everything going on with men's basketball. Just sign up and become a member of the premium side of the website, and you should be as filled in as anybody on all things Baylor men's basketball. So a lot going on there. Obviously, decisions to be made, or I guess this pursuit to be finalized one way or the other, and we'll continue to keep the beat there. But the transfer portal is really the main thing now. So we'll watch Jonas Adu and what happens there with the big man from Tennessee. Obviously, he would be a huge get. And then whatever else they work up and cook up in the portal here, it's very much portal season now that we've moved on from the Scott Drew drama, and can know and rest assured and be clear of mind that he is not going anywhere. But his staff, on the other hand, as we just mentioned, well, that's another story now. So the drama never stops, really. So there you go with men's basketball, and a lot happening. But a lot happening also over on the football side of things. They wrapped up spring drills this past week with a practice at the indoor facility as they continue to finish that construction project. It's going to be incredible when it's all done. You can see the things all coming together over there if you visited, and that includes an extended indoor, and that is where the team practiced with the threat of rain this past weekend, canceled what was the spring game, the green and gold game, but it was really just going to be a glorified practice at McLean Stadium. They had a glorified practice at the indoor facility. You and a lot of others were out there to check that out. There's many other notes that are probably of the most interest now as far as the transfer portal that we'll get into here in just a second. But your thoughts, I know you and Travis had a lengthy video and piece as well, right up on all of your, I guess, impressions from Saturday. People can go over to the website and check all of that out to get like really deep into the practice itself and just kind of where things seemingly sit. I had a write-up on Dave Aranda and a lot of good tidbits that he had. They did not announce a starting quarterback, but I guess let's save that part. I'll go through the checklist of the things that are of importance. First, though, your thoughts just on what you saw that you would like to share that's not maybe in the write-up, and just kind of your general feel as they break camp here.
Okay, so I think the most important place to start is, and the most intriguing, is that quarterback position. I do think DeQuan Finn was better out on the final day of practice. I view him as the guy coming out of spring camp. I view him as the guy who will be the starting quarterback for Baylor. But Sir Robertson, in general, throughout the 4 weeks of camp, was pretty consistently the better guy. But I do think DeQuan really showed some things the last couple weeks. I think he really elevated his game that last day, and I thought he was really accurate throwing the football deep. They were running kind of some, I guess you'd call it 7-on-7 type stuff, and he was extremely efficient. He didn't incomplete a pass. He had 2 touchdowns, one to Josh Cameron, one to Keytron Jackson. He was just really good, and I do think it's one of those situations where when things don't go perfectly for DeQuan Finn, he is still able to make plays for this offense and make this offense move. Whereas I feel like the other quarterbacks, they really need a good pocket, really need time to throw the football for them to be as successful as I think Baylor wants them to be. And that's what Sawyer has been. Is he's been really accurate when he's had time in the pocket. And he's a good athlete. He's an underrated athlete, and you can run some things as far as, QB power type plays with him, which are definitely intriguing. But his best quality is when you give him a clean pocket and he's laying it rip from the pocket. And he did some of that. He hit Monterey Baldwin multiple times for touchdowns on the day. Both guys were good, but I think DeQuan Finn was a little bit better. So that's kind of the first part. The second part is the wide receivers are far better than a year ago. Ashton Hawkins was absolutely unguardable. I think there was only one time where a pass to him was broken up by the defense. Outside of that, it was a bunch of touchdowns, a bunch of jump balls that he came down with. He's got really long arms and sneaky explosive ability as far as leaping. that really stood out to me. He's going to be a fun player to watch. Jamal Bell, the transfer from Nevada, blazing fast, runs a 4.37. He showed a lot. And then you have your kind of staples, right? Keatron Jackson, Monterey Baldwin were awesome. Hal Presley continuing to make strides, I think, to being the kind of player you want him to be. But that's their top 5. Josh Cameron in the mix as well. And some of the other guys were really intriguing. And I know we're going to talk about that position group specifically here in a second about the transfer portal. But in general, the passing game looks really good. It looks far improved from a year ago, and I think Jake Spavital has definitely played a massive role in that. So very excited about that. I think they're going to be able to score some points this fall.
Yeah, so no quarterback starter announced, although we could have some clarity on that in the next couple of weeks. I wrote about that in the write-up about what Dave Aranda had to say afterwards. If I had to choose, I'd say it'd be DeQuan Finn. That just makes the most sense. You do run the risk of either guy entering the transfer portal now that there are no transfer restrictions any longer, but hopefully you can keep them both on campus and competing. They're both going to be needed, and they both have a shot to solidify themselves with more workouts over the summer and then, see what happens in the fall. I don't know what kind of market would even be out there at this point. I mean, it really is like everybody's pretty much got their quarterback at this stage, but those are two, players with potential. But I'm not really all that worried about that right now. We'll see when there actually is an announcement, but they're going to keep it going for at least a few days longer, and then we'll hear one of several options. They're not going to name a starter, and the competition continues, which I think is probably the best way to go. Or DeQuan's the starter, and that's it. Or Sawyer's the starter, and that's it. Or DeQuan's the starter, or Sawyer's the starter, and the other guy decides to leave. Like, there's the handful of options that are going to happen. The only scenario that makes no sense whatsoever is one of them gets named a starter, and then they pull a Texas A&M, and they both leave, like Kyler Murray and Kyle Allen. Like, I don't think you have to worry about that. But the best-case scenario would be both stay and compete throughout the summer, and you have a couple quarterbacks to lean on in the fall, although DeQuan Finn seems like the best bet as far as your starting quarterback goes. So we await an announcement there. Could be any day now, but most likely will be within the next couple of weeks based on what Dave Aranda said.
Yeah, and I do think that it's important to mention that even if DeQuan Finn is named the starter, I think that this offseason in particular, and we saw some flashes last year, but Sora Robertson is going to be a very good football player. And I think my hope is that even if he's the backup this year, I think if he comes back next year as the starting quarterback, I think Baylor's in a really good position at quarterback going forward. That would be the most ideal situation. In an ideal world, you're able to hold on to both, and Sora Robertson is your locked and loaded guy next year, along with being your very high-end backup this year. I think that would be the best-case scenario, I think, for this roster.
Yes, it would, and I guess since we're talking quarterbacks, we can get to the portal in a second. There was some quarterback news from this past week that wasn't so good, and that was the fact that Adam Schobel, their highly rated 2025 quarterback commit, 4-star, had decided to decommit and flip to Oklahoma State. And I don't know, I got a feeling about this. Like, I was going through, I hadn't cleaned up my Twitter follows in a really long time. I mean, like, over a year. I just, not even touched my Twitter. I'm barely on there. And I just decided, I'm going to clean up all my lists, and I'm going to clean up all my follows, like people that aren't following me back, like that kind of thing. So I'm going through, and I noticed, his dad I had followed because we had him on the show. I don't think he ever followed me. That's fine. But Adam had at one point in time, and then he wasn't. And that's not anything surprising. Like high school kids, they just – it's like a light switch. You flip on and on who you follow. But I remember it just kind of I don't know, made me kind of pause for a second. And then I was like – yeah, and I thought I saw him. He's visiting Oklahoma State. And I don't know why, but I just got this sort of feeling of something just seems a little off there. And it wasn't but a day later, and this is just total coincidence, but it wasn't but a day later. Here comes news. Adam Schobel's decided to decommit, and he's flipping to Oklahoma State. So I just had a weird premonition about this. And I know there's maybe been some signs and things of that nature, so you can give us your perspective. But obviously this is a huge blow to this recruiting class, to this 25 class. It's a great pickup for Oklahoma State to get the flip and get their quarterback for their class. So hats off to the Cowboys, but man, it's really hard to recruit when you're so in flux as this program is right now. That's my first thought above anything else. And I don't think that the focus needs to be so all in on the quarterback of the future. I do think they got to worry about, like, literally this year. They have nothing to plan for beyond that. You still have to work for beyond that because that's your job. And if you are around, you can't start like, oh, I'm getting the job again, or I'm going to be here again next year. Okay, let me start on the 25. Like, you got to do all that now, even with the uncertainty in the air. But, man, it really makes things difficult. So did that contribute here, just the whole – how long will Dave Aranda be around if they don't win enough games this year? Where did this sort of come from your perspective? Adam Schobel decommitting and now leaving a massive void in their upcoming recruiting class for 2025.
My initial read on this had everything to do with what you just talked about, stability with the coaching staff. And, Mike Gundy has been at Oklahoma State for a very long time. You want to talk about...
He's not leaving. Like, no. He's not going anywhere.
Like, coaching stability-wise, there's probably not a better program in the country, to be honest with you. And so that all kind of makes sense. I understand that. I do think that they're... I guess just in general, I just probably need to throw this out there. Adam Schobel is not going to take his official visit to Baylor anymore. This is their...
So he's done.
It's done. Yeah, it's done. Baylor and Adam Schobel are done now. He is going to... I don't know if he's going to take any other official visits, but he did take the Oklahoma State one and then... decided, obviously, to flip to Oklahoma State. And I kind of had mentioned this on the board a little bit, that there were multiple 2025 quarterbacks who had visited. They were looking at multiple 2025 quarterbacks and trying to get guys on campus. It seemed like they were reaching out to more 2025 quarterbacks as well. And so all of that kind of added to, hey, everyone, just keep an eye on this, because it might be something that does end up happening. I did not hear that it was going to be this imminent, but it happened pretty quickly after his official visit that he decided to make that change. I know he talked to the staff. This was not just a complete blindside. I feel like that's important to mention. I feel like this was definitely a just kind of a conversation that was built around the trust that they've had and the trust that they've had for a long time. The hard part here is that he had been committed for so long to Baylor, and then now just decides to make this move without even taking his official visit to Baylor, which I find rather interesting and was not something that I expected him to do. But hey, he made his decision. Now Baylor's going to have to move on and find their 2025 quarterback. But again, like you mentioned, you can fill in this position with the transfer portal, which Baylor has done. They've also recruited. They got Nate Bennett in this most recent class, and he's played pretty well this spring. So there are ways to fix this, but I also don't want to act like this isn't a big loss. Adam Schobel's a really, really good quarterback, really, really talented, and a guy that Baylor absolutely wanted in this class.
Yep, so he is now going to be headed to Stillwater. A big loss there. Again, though, just with the unsteady foundation that they're on at the moment, I don't think this comes as too much of a shocker that you're going to potentially lose. Even when things are going well, you still lose players. But, yeah, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's not a good look, and it's definitely a sign of that instability. So they have to go and win this year. I mean, pretty much that's all you can do is go win football games, go make a bowl game, go win as many games as possible, and then, go from there. But this is just the reality of sort of where you are. But at the same time, you don't need Adam Schobel right now or even next year. And so if you want to look at it from a positive side, this isn't going to derail anything unless they allow it to, basically. But it is a loss, no doubt about it. But it doesn't have to be catastrophic if they handle it the right way and just go out and win some football games. So, take that how you will, but certainly a blow for the 25 recruiting class and just kind of the perception of sort of what's going on right now. Meanwhile, there was healthy attrition coming out of spring ball. Dave Aranda mentioned after the final practice that they would spend the next couple of weeks going over film, having conversations about what to do at starting quarterback. We touched on that. Should expect something, I would think, in the next 10 days or so, one way or the other, on whatever they want to do moving forward at quarterback. But another comment that I know caught people's attention was in regards to just sort of his overview of the team. Really likes the running back spot. Tight ends, I think, no mention's a good mention, but that room's obviously stock full. Offensive line's getting better with Kurt Daniker back, but still a work in progress. Quarterback, they feel really good about. So offense looks pretty okay. Offensive line still needs help. Everywhere else, though, you feel pretty good. The only position I didn't mention is wide receiver because that's the focus now, as the comment he made in regards to that group was that they had an overabundance. That's the word he used, overabundance at wide receiver, and made it pretty clear following Saturday there was going to be some attrition at wide receiver. We know they needed scholarship room with only like a one or two at their disposal heading into Saturday, and now they've got like a handful potentially because 3 wide receivers have hit the transfer portal since Dave Aranda. Actually, one before that, the night before that, and then 2 since he made those comments. So they did have an overabundance, and now they've addressed that. With 3 guys hitting the portal. Let's start off with the first one that came right before the spring game. I guess was it the night before?
Yeah.
Yeah, the night before, former 4-star signee Armani Winfield, who in his couple of years in Waco has just not produced, has just not really been in the mix. Has just kind of been one of those guys that you see him and you go, he's supposed to be a big deal, but we just haven't really seen anything to indicate that that's around the corner. He's just sort of in the mix and not at the top of the depth chart. And so just sort of what's going on here. Well, Dave Aranda's a big Armani Winfield fan. He still feels like he's got a lot of skills and talent and he could have a very successful college career, but it's just not going to happen in Waco, Texas. He is in the transfer portal, could not find a spot basically or find his role on this team, Grayson. I know you're very high on him. I've seen some of the discussion. Was he already maxed out by the time he got to Waco? Off the field, distractions, what's going on? I know that from the sounds of it, Aranda really loves the guy and that he really appreciates how he's grown off the field and he's just dealt with a lot. And sometimes we got to bring that up because we lose sight of the human connection in this transactional business that is college athletics. It's just like, body in, body out, body in, body out. But there was some, personal touch on him talking about Armani Winfield that I appreciated. So your thoughts on Armani Winfield for starters deciding to enter the transfer portal?
Right. I mean, he felt like a very safe floor prospect when Baylor got him. He was a 4-star guy and a guy who kind of had a really good skill set as far as it felt like his feel for the game was definitely there. I think the problem was that as far as athleticism goes, he's not an elite athlete. And he could not create elite separation during his time at Baylor, and his hands were inconsistent. And when you put those together, it's really hard to play if you're not creating separation and catching the ball. I mean, you got to be able to do that to last in college football. And so, they got to see him for multiple years, see what he could do, and he was just not making strides and not moving up the depth chart. He was still behind, guys like Ketron Jackson, Hal Presley, Josh Cameron. And I think Micah Gifford was also kind of a guy that was coming that might have passed him as well. So you kind of put that all together and it's like, once again, it's hard for Baylor to hold on to 3rd-string wide receivers, which is what we're going to talk about with all 3 of these guys. They just don't really need to do that. They got to be able to add at other positions. They got to be able to address the offensive and defensive lines, and all of these give them an opportunity to do that.
Yes, they do. So there was, right before Dave Aranda had made his comments, one receiver that was in the books, but then the fact that he did say it even after Armani Winfield, because he addressed Armani Winfield, and he said all these glowing things about him and how he still has, a lot of promise with his career, and he could go be great somewhere else. So he says that, and then that's after Armani Winfield. So you knew that more wide receiver attrition was coming, was my point. And then, sure enough, in 24 hours, another 2 players reportedly heading to the portal. One of them, Jordan Neighbors, the sophomore wide receiver, I guess junior to be wide receiver from Rockwall. He had 8 catches for 73 yards last season. Had a catch for 4 yards the season prior, so not a lot of production. I know there was also a lot of, hey, he's athletic and then he can do this and he can eventually turn into this and maybe be able to do this, but through a couple of seasons just didn't see a whole lot of production. So 9 catches 77 yards is what you're missing out on from the past couple years. And I know it goes deeper than just that, and running game, things like that, blocking for all of these guys that we're talking about. It's not just your catches and your yardage, but Jordan Neighbors goes into the portal, and then reports as well on Javon Gibson also going into the portal, who's been kind of in and out, it feels like, as far as his sort of place on this team, so I wasn't shocked to see his name brought up as well. He also had not done much in the way in terms of production, still a very young guy, but did not record any stats last year, was rumored to not really be around right at one point, and then he was again, and then he wasn't, and he was, and so was never really clear on where he kind of stood, but had 2 catches for 22 yards 2 seasons ago. Yeah. And that was all she wrote. So, again, nothing personal, but you're not losing anything in terms of production. 3 guys all totaled together doesn't even quite come to like one good player's performance over the course of a season. So you can see where the thought process was here. And Randa said, like, if you're not cracking the depth chart at this point for some of these guys, like, we got to have some conversations. And I think with all 3 of these players, you can see where the conversations were. So Javon Gibson, Jordan Neighbors, your thoughts on those 2 also heading to the portal?
So let's start with Javon Gibson, just because he fits in more with the Armani Winfield thing. It just, he wasn't passing guys on the depth chart. And so it was very clear he was going to be behind Josh Cameron, Keytron Jackson, Hal Presley, and even Jamal Bell's playing some outside receiver. So he's going to be behind all those guys. And again, it's kind of hard to have a roster with guys who just haven't shown you enough to break into the depth chart, break into, the 2 deep, or just really show you that they're going to be really good players in the future either. I think that's a part of it as well. And so he kind of fits in with the Armani Winfield piece. I was high on him as far as his athletic potential. He ran really well out of high school, had great size, but again, not a proven route runner and not a proven guy who made tough contested catches. And that's really hard in the college game. You got to be able to do those things. I think Jordan Neighbors is probably the one where you're having the most conversations about as far as on the board as to whether it was healthy attrition or not. But the thing of it is I kind of look at it like this. He was a really good high school prospect, really fast, an elite athlete, honestly. He tests extremely well. And he's shown a few moments, especially I think his biggest play of his career was that reverse against Oklahoma on the road in Norman. That was probably his biggest impact play. He had a couple impact plays in the return game as well. But in general, would you rather have a guy who is your 3rd string inside receiver and maybe even 4th string behind Ashton Hawkins, Monterey Baldwin, and Jaden Porter was also, I think, even or coming for that spot as well, that Neighbors was holding? Would you rather have that and potentially he becomes a good player in the future, or would you rather use that spot on another position that matters more, like the offensive line or defensive line? And to me, I find that to be a very simple answer, unfortunately, and that is you use that on a position that can actually help you win this year. And I think that matters more for this Baylor program right now. And it stinks because I love what Jordan Neighbors brings to the table as an athlete, but he didn't show consistent hands, didn't show consistent route running, and didn't show up consistently as a blocker. And you put all that together and it just leads you to wanting a little bit more. And again, he wasn't going to crack the 2 deep. And because of that, you open up another roster spot to go into the transfer portal and add in areas that you absolutely need to this offseason. It's as simple as that.
So 3 scholarships open up in the span of about 48 hours, all 3 from the receiver room with Javon Gibson, Jordan Neighbors, and Armani Winfield. I would think that probably does it at wide receiver. I mean, because you're now probably getting to the point where, especially with the offense you run, you've got about 10, 11 guys on scholarship. So I think that's maybe about where you want to be. If you lose another, it's probably like 1 more, if any. But you did have an overabundance, and I think losing 3 guys, that clearly addresses that. So we'll see. Maybe a little bit more attrition there, but, I don't know. There's not also too many other places it can come from. That's the thing, is because you desperately need D linemen and O linemen. So it's not coming from either of those. And, you don't have any super sure things necessarily in a lot of other places. So there's going to be more. But, I do wonder where it comes from now that receivers kind of kicked out their first few entries.
And it honestly, I know this is surprising because Dave Aranda said an overabundance at receiver. It wouldn't shock me if they brought in another receiver, though. It really
Right,
wouldn't
yeah.
shock me. You're probably either looking for a guy that has 1 year left or looking for a guy that has multiple years left. You're probably somewhere in that area. The thing of it is after this year, Baylor only has 4 receivers on scholarship. Jaden Porter, Micah Gifford, Josh Cameron, and Cameron Bonner. That is pretty wild. They're going to have to load up in 2025 and obviously in the transfer portal as well. But to me, that also signifies a potential here where maybe you take a shot on a young guy that leaves a Power 5 program that hasn't gotten to play but had a high recruiting profile, or maybe another old guy to just come in and solidify the position. Something to monitor there, but you're absolutely right. Now they got to look in other directions. And the 2025 class, you really have to hit on wide receiver in that group, especially outside receiver.
Yeah, especially getting the outside guys. That has been the slot's going to be fine this year, but the outside guys a little bit more of a question mark. Like, does Hal Presley turn into the type of player that you think he can be, and so on and so forth.
And he only has this year left, and Keytron. Right. That's the thing. You really are gonna have to find guys who can play that outside receiver position for the future, not even just for this year.
Yep. So interesting dilemmas in front of them, but I think again it's a situation where they're so just concerned about this year that it's so much harder to plan. And hopefully, whatever happens this season, there's some clarity about the following few seasons, so whoever's in charge can build on that. I don't think you can afford to do the year-to-year thing with Dave Aranda. I just think that just is going to wear down your fan base, wear down your staff. If you're doing that year-to-year thing, for lack of a better term, I just don't know how healthy that would be. And then obviously if they make a change, then whoever comes in is going to have some time to build this thing up. But it's just a very chaotic, the roster management, and who's in, who's out, who's around, who's not, how long do you have to develop them, so on and so forth. So, yeah, if something gives at wide receiver, and we will see where else some more attrition might come from, but they're definitely going to open up some more scholarships. So that'll
Which
be
they
another
need to do.
Yeah, so that'll be another conversation to continue to monitor over at Sikkim365.com. Anything else from football as far as this past weekend goes? I know there's some visits that are being set up as they continue to look now for offensive linemen and defensive linemen and wide receiver potentially and a pass rusher. That was another thing that Dave Aranda says, like, oh, is that all you need? Just linemen and pass rushers and all of that. I guess that's kind of where they sit now, huh? Just on the hunt for players to the transfer portal.
Yeah, and I would say the positions that are of priority, like you mentioned, offensive line, interior defensive line, edge, and then it kind of becomes more of that best available type. Whether that be safety or whether that be cornerback. I think there's a lot of areas that you could go. But I think in general, it becomes very clear that they know they need to address the fronts on both sides. The line of scrimmage has to get better. And really, we didn't see enough of it this spring, especially from the offensive line with Kurt Daniker being out as long as he was. He finally came back and sort of was full go, but not quite. He's going to be a guy that's going to be really important for them, but they just have other areas they have to address. They have to have more depth there as well. So a lot to look forward to, and a big official visit weekend coming up.
All right, so that's where football is. Spring is closed. They now go not into hibernation, but into the portal, onto the recruiting trail, and then they'll have workouts behind the scenes as well. And we'll have, as it warrants, news that trickles out, and that's important, but we'll be all over the recruiting side of things over on Sikkim365.com. Kind of release spring's over with. Like, it was fun, but after a while, you're like, all right, kind of get the gist of this, and let's get down the road and get into the season. So we'll have a little bit of a breather besides recruiting. And then here in a little less than 3 months, you'll have Big 12 Media Days in Las Vegas that'll start to kickstart everything back up. But we do get a little bit of a breather, although recruiting never stops, not only with football, but also basketball, obviously, as well, as we talked about at the start of the show with the men being very active early on with Jeremy Roach as an addition and possibly Jonas Adu. We'll see how all of that plays out with him and perhaps others as well. I guess touch on some spring sports real quick. Was there anything else recruiting-wise that you wanted to get into? I mean, I think you just kind of touched on that, but did we check all the boxes? Adam Schobel decommits, transfer portal?
Yeah. I guess quickly, they are going to have visitors this weekend. I'm not going to dive into all the names. You can find that on Sikkim 365 Premium, but they do have 4 high school recruits who will be taking an official visit. This is the first official visit weekend. It'll be the only one that is not in the month of June. They're going to have 3 in the month of June, but then this one was kind of separate for guys because now it's gotten really complex because guys can take as many official visits as they want. So because of that, you have to have multiple dates. So this is for guys who their June is already filled out. So you're able to get them on campus. They have 4 high school guys, currently have 3 transfers visiting as well. I think they might get to 4 by the end of it. And so that's kind of the biggest thing coming up this week. And we'll recap all of it next week. I don't want to dive too deep into it just because, especially with the transfer portal stuff, it's a little bit, a little bit murky, a little bit quieter there. But I will say, as far as the high school guys go, they have 2 4-star cornerbacks visiting in Cade Phillips and Micah Strickland. And then they have an edge rusher in Max Granville, who's another 4-star prospect, a guy that has been very high on their board, has a great relationship with Caleb Collins. I know A&M is recruiting him heavily. And then La Cueva offensive lineman Mark Handy. Those are the 4 high school visitors that they're going to have on campus. Really good group. I mean, 3 4-stars and Mark Handy, who's been kind of our priority for Mason Miller since he got the job at Baylor. So really important there. And then they're mixed with these transfer portal guys who are obviously major priorities for Baylor as well. So it's a really interesting, fascinating, and cool weekend because not often do you have a weekend where it's a bunch of high school guys and a bunch of transfer portal guys who are high priority types. So they're going to have a really nice group, probably right around between 8 to 10 guys in total.
All right, so that's where we sit as far as recruiting and everything else that's going on with the team right now. And again, stay tuned to Sikkim365.com for all the latest information. Meanwhile, baseball got off to a nice start. They'd been on quite the win streak and feeling good about having a handful of wins in a row. They beat Kansas 14-5 on Friday night, and life couldn't be better, quite frankly, until they got to Saturday and they dropped the second contest of the series 8-4, and then drop the third contest of the series, the rubber match on Sunday, 12-2, got 10-run ruled in 8 innings, and Kansas takes the series at Baylor Ballpark after dropping the opener. So now the Bears are looking at an 18-20 overall record and a 500 mark at 9-9 in Big 12 play. But now what was a handful of wins in a row is suddenly a series loss and back-to-back losses that they are now coming off of. So, Kansas, nice job on the part of the Jayhawks to bounce back from that Friday night loss. But the team will now take on Sam Houston this evening at Baylor Ballpark as we record this on a Tuesday, and then they will head to Morgantown this weekend for a 3-game series Friday, Saturday, Sunday against a solid Mountaineers team. So not the easiest of trips to go and take. So you wonder, like, how much can they keep their head above water? How much can they continue to carve out as far as the wins go? But starting to get down to the last couple weeks of the season here. So your thoughts on Baylor baseball, if any, after this past weekend's series loss to Kansas?
Really tough series loss. This is one that I think they fully expected to win. The streak that they were on, they were coming in really hot. Really, that Saturday game was the one they really needed to win. And to start off so strong, winning that first game 14-5, it just felt like, okay, steal one more, win another series, put yourself in such a good position to just get another series win and continue to find momentum. I mean, they have really been good over the last month. And now, the issue is you roll in, you play West Virginia, who's RPI-wise the 33rd ranked team in the country. Then you got to take on a TCU team that's number 41 in RPI, and it doesn't really matter what their record is. They're still very quality. They've played a really tough schedule. You're going to have to play them. Then you're facing Oklahoma, who's number 22 in RPI and has a great record, is a very good team. So I guess my point in all this is these next 3 series are going to be extremely difficult. And it's going to be hard to find wins. The good news is each win will be far more valuable than the ones they've had recently. But they're going to have to play a very high level of baseball and really come back after this and play well if they're going to have any hope at kind of continuing the momentum that they got midseason.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you're not looking at a trip to Omaha anytime soon. I don't even know what expectations are as far as the postseason eventually, like what that, what your feelings are about like how they get there, what they do eventually, how they build on what they've been doing. But they did have some good mojo going, and that kind of felt like the air got let out a little bit this past weekend, dropping the final 2 of that series. So there's things to like, certainly, about what they've done. I think they've exceeded some expectations at times, but still a lot of building to do, obviously, with this baseball program.
Yeah, I would say their Big 12 record is pretty on par with expectations. 9-9, like that's solid. I mean, the problem is their next few series are against teams that are
go sideways.
Very good. Yeah, so things could go pretty sideways for them. But, I mean, it was really just the non-conference. Their start to the year where they suffered all those injuries and couldn't quite figure out the pieces to move in and really get things going. And now it felt like, things were trending in the right direction. They still are, I think.
Yeah.
But the issue is like you said, trending in the right direction, but you're 18-20 on the year is very different than trending in the right direction being a borderline postseason team, which they're not.
Right. Yeah. That's what I mean is like, is that okay for everybody in year 2? Like, but by year 3, you need to get in the postseason. Like, where's everybody's sort of brains as far as that goes? I don't think there's any doubt like that. You ask 5 people, they might have 5 different opinions on what they deem, acceptable or whatever. But I do think everybody can agree that they've made some very positive strides.
Yeah, they need to be in the postseason next year, especially with how bad the Big 12 actually is.
And no Texas, no Oklahoma.
Right, being gone.
I don't think, I know that West Coast schools can have some good baseball programs, but I don't think that they just come in and like supplant Oklahoma and Texas and as solid as they were. So, yeah, you would think that also would make it a little bit easier, if anything. But we'll see how baseball finishes out as they start to get down to the nitty-gritty here. They will have, let's see, got a little bit of a ways to go. Got Sam Houston later on the night, that weekend series with Virginia, the UTA the following week, followed by a series at home against TCU, and then Tarleton in a midweek and a series against Oklahoma. And then they will get into TCU again and UCF. So they got a little bit of a ways to go here. They got another 3 weeks of the schedule remaining. So they can do some damage and make some noise, but they could also get really sideways if they're not careful. Meanwhile, softball now 25-18 overall and 8-13 in conference play as they got a sweep of UCF this past week, and that was after a really tough week the week prior, getting beat up on by a very, very good Texas team. But this past week did lose the Tuesday contest to UTA 4-3, so they were on a little bit of a skid there of 4 losses in a row. But then went in and swept UCF at Getterman Stadium 2-1 on Friday, 1-0 on Sunday in the first of the doubleheader, and then 1-0 again in the latter half of the doubleheader. So 3-0 weekend. They'll now face future conference opponent Utah on Wednesday in Salt Lake City, and then they will head over. They're making a Utah swing this week. They will head over to Provo and take on BYU over the weekend. So a little preview of next year's Big 12 with the Utah contest, and then BYU giving them the full scope of the state of Utah this week. But that's where they sit now. Over 500 in the overall record, under 500 in the season record. And much like baseball, you're starting to get down to the nitty-gritty of getting into your final few weeks here. So they have that Utah swing, and then following that, they will have Houston at home for a series, and that's it. I mean, that's the end of the softball schedule. So you're down to your final 7 games beginning tomorrow.
Well, I mean, the good news for Baylor is, and this is what we talked about last week, they have a great chance to improve their overall record. I mean, BYU's 8-13. They're not very good. They're just fine. They're kind of around where Baylor is, to be honest, 26-19, even though I think Baylor's schedule has been far more difficult. And then you get Houston, who's the worst team in the Big 12. So there's a chance there, if you can sweep both of those, you might end the year with a pretty good record and definitely give yourself a much better opportunity at making the postseason. And potentially moving up the Big 12 standings to where you're maybe the 4 seed instead of a 5 or a 6 seed.
Yeah. So there's opportunities still out there, although it's getting down to the nitty-gritty as far as the amount of games remaining. So baseball, softball still rolling through, still got a couple of weeks left, and we'll keep tabs on that as well. Levi, Caraway, in particular, with some good stuff over on baseball constantly on the website for you baseball fans, definitely check out his stuff. All right, that about covers. Is that enough news for you? I mean, my goodness, Jeremy Roach and the basketball side of things, Alvin Brooks, rumored to join Kentucky. You've got Jonas Adu from Tennessee. That's potentially the next big fish on the hook. You got other transfers you're looking at. You got football. You got the transfer portal. You got the end of spring football. You got decommit from Adam Schobel. You got softball, baseball going on, and I'm probably missing a couple of things here. NFL draft, you had Jalen Bridges declaring for the NBA draft. The NFL draft coming up this week. And that's where the news kind of skids to a halt because there's really not much going on right there. I saw somebody the other day on the website just came across a comment. Is Craig going to have like a big write-up on, I think it was the UFL stuff. I'll throw something together, but to be perfectly honest with you, there's just not a lot of content for it. I mean, I'll definitely write something before the end of the week, but as far as the combination of all of the pro football stuff right now, I'm probably going to have to go flesh out kind of everybody who's still in the league and sort of where they are to put enough content in there because basically the NFL draft story for Baylor this year is where does Gabe Hall go and when and where. And then after that, you're probably looking at undrafted guys. And then on the UFL side of things, there's maybe a handful of players. Abram Smith got hurt before the season started. So that's why I haven't just written a ton about the pro side compared to the last couple years. There's just not as much material to work with. But Gabe Hall, good luck to him later on this week. I've seen a little bit here and there about him and the possibility of getting drafted. Certainly nothing on day 1 or day 2, which is the first round and then the second and third rounds. But day 3, I could see him getting selected. Don't know about any of the other guys and how great their percentage chances are, like a TJ Franklin or was it Barrington or I'm trying to think of who else.
Smith.
Mike Smith. Mike Smith's not very unlikely that he would get picked. So, I mean, I
don't think any of them are except for Gabe.
Right. I mean, undrafted free agent, though, I could see a couple of those guys. So I'll keep tabs on that. But, just not a lot to talk about with the NFL draft this year. 3 years ago, it was the busiest it's ever been, and that's just kind of slowly trickled as well. So, aware of it, but just not a lot to discuss there. All right, so I think that covers about everything now at this point, really. And so let's get into the mailbag and start off with K-Sig Bear with Neighbors and Gibson entering the portal. Who would be some of our top wide receivers in the portal we would go after?
Throw in Armani Winfield to the entering the portal part as well. I know there's a couple guys like Javarius Johnson who entered from Auburn back in December. He was an interesting name that I had my eye on. Sam Brown, who entered from Houston. He's interesting. I think he's going to be very wanted by a lot of teams.
I think there's going to be a lot of interest for him.
For sure. And so I think right now it's more so looking at guys who enter after these past few spring games. I think there's going to be a nice second wave of guys who enter as they have these conversations after spring, because every school has discussions within their room about the depth chart, where things are, and then guys make decisions from there. So there's not a ton to be excited about currently, I don't think, from the transfer portal for the wide receiver position. And I will also say that has not been the top priority position either. That they've been looking at. Would it shock me if they add another one? No. Is that a bigger priority than edge, defensive line, or offensive line? No. So I do think that will come down to how many spots they end up having available, which will determine, what kind of receiver they go after and how many they can actually take. That's kind of where I'm at. Right now, again, we mentioned this earlier, I'm trending more towards if they do take one, it'll be an older guy or a guy with multiple years. Either way, it needs to probably be an outside receiver. They really need some depth there. They really need some depth with guys who have multiple years of eligibility available.
And so they wound down their spring last week, and 3 receivers hit the portal for those who might be looking for receivers. But now they turn their attention towards the portal, and they've got 1 weekend's worth of games. This is the final spring football weekend. You'll have a handful of games on Friday. The biggest program is Arizona State. All the rest of them are kind of like Lamar and Eastern Washington. And not that players can't come from those programs, but Arizona State's definitely the biggest school on Friday. And then on Saturday, you've got TCU, Colorado, Oregon, UCLA, Arizona, Oklahoma State, Washington State. So there's always some attrition that could come from those schools. And then I think the following week, Washington's got a very late spring game. So them, and then on Saturday, May 4th, St. Thomas, which I didn't even know they had a football program, Indiana State. Those are that's the remaining. So there's 2 weekends left, basically, and one main weekend this upcoming weekend.
Right, and I'll also say, but this past weekend, the attrition from that is just still now leaking out.
Yeah.
Like there was John Demery from LSU, the running back there, he entered the transfer portal. The running back from Colorado entered. There's a lot of guys who are still going to be entering the portal. Right. From this weekend scrimmages. So there's still time for more guys to enter, but right now the portal is not extremely intriguing at wide receiver, not yet.
Yeah. So we'll see how all that goes. But thank you for the question. JBear19, has there been any emphasis on tackling this spring?
Yeah, absolutely. I know Dave Aranda's been really working on that with the linebacker group. That's been, I think, a focal point for the entire staff defensively. They weren't good enough there. The cornerbacks have been working on it a lot as well, which they definitely need some work in that area too, outside of Caden Jenkins. They were not great there. Safety as well. So yeah, that has been emphasis. I will also say Baylor also put an emphasis on having less injuries. And so I don't know how many days were full tackling, but I do know that they did put an emphasis on it this spring.
GMAC, are we cursed when it comes to recruiting high school quarterbacks? Sure seems like it.
I mean, I don't think I can say that they aren't.
Yeah,
they've had issues with it.
You're right. It sure seems like it. I mean, there's no exact science here, but the whole process of getting high school quarterbacks has been a very topsy-turvy one for them. Apart from the wide receiver room, where else do we expect good attrition from this Baylor football team?
I mean, I always hate saying specific names, so I'm not going to do that. But I do think that there are positions on this roster that have a lot of guys who aren't playing a lot, who you could maybe see move on. I think positions where I don't want to lose guys are offensive line and defensive line. I think Baylor feels really good about their top 4 running backs, so don't know if there could be attrition there. I think linebacker is an area where they haven't gotten very good play at that position, so you're kind of curious. There's a bunch of older guys there as to, maybe one of them or 2 of them decide to move on as well. So that's kind of what I would say. Those are the main positions that I'm looking at. But yeah, I think that there's opportunities here for Baylor to open up some more spots.
If you were to go back to our men's football Big 12 championship win, which position group would you recruit the most off the back of that momentum? Quarterback, O-line, wide receivers, or D-line, Sic 'em Bears?
Ooh, offensive line, I think, is the area that I would go with. I think if they had a really good offensive line last year, that team would have been a lot better. Probably would have been a bowl team if they had a really good offensive line. They just did not. And after that Big 12 championship, they really haven't had a great offensive line. They were okay in 2022, but last year everything fell off the rails. I think if they had one, they would have been far better.
Scotty B, what do you think about players going into the transfer portal with a do not contact tag? I think that just means they know where they're going.
Yeah, that's how I read it as well.
That's basically all there is to it. That just means that you already have a list of the teams that you're interested in and you don't want to hear from anybody else. Like, don't bother me, basically, or no, don't even try. I'm already locked in on where I want to go. That's all that means. And I think it's good. It doesn't waste anybody's time trying to pursue somebody if they're clearly not interested. Anyways, Baylor men's basketball had a visitor this past weekend. Aaronette Vonley, the starting center at Colorado, was the visitor, and she literally entered the transfer portal 8 days ago. She's also the sister of pro basketball player Noah Vonley. So there's Scotty B chiming in. Appreciate you as always. Bearcats, do you think Baylor football will go after Mikhail Harrison Pilot in the portal? He is a former Temple Wildcat that went to where did he
Houston.
go? Houston. And I don't know, Baylor and his how much did they really even talk during that process? I'm trying to even remember at this point. I know there was some interest there, but to what extent, I don't really recall.
It was a lot early, and then it kind of tapered off a little bit, and he ends up at Houston. I think he'd be an interesting name. I should have mentioned him probably when I was talking about the receivers in the transfer portal, because he is a guy that obviously has ties with the program, was recruited by the program, but also was they kind of stopped recruiting him. So I'm curious if that's still the issue there or what they decide to do. I liked him as a player, but obviously, he struggled to get on the field at Houston. So you wonder, how did he develop there and kind of those things. But he's intriguing.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, they've had some hits and some misses with Temple High School. I mean, you look at T.J. Franklin obviously was a really good player for you, but there's been some guys that have rolled through that you're like, dang, if they could have gotten him. I don't know where Mikael Harrison Pilot falls on that list. So he's got good size. He's a good athlete. But I'm thinking more of who's the young man that they lost to Texas A&M, who's now like this defense. York. Yeah, Torian York was a big one.
And they would have had Torian York and Christian Brathwaite in that class, and now Brathwaite is in the transfer portal, which I think that one is very
one
interesting.
To watch. Yeah.
I would say that's very interesting. But yeah, imagine if they would have had Torian York and Christian Brathwaite. I think we'd be feeling very differently about their linebacking core, which was a huge problem last year.
Yeah, I think we would as well. Jared Wiley, I mean, he originally went to Texas, but he ended up Quinn Johnston was a big one. So yeah, there's been some misses out of Temple, but they've also got some good out of the local connection though as well. All right. So, yeah, it's all that to say, Mikael Harrison Pilot, they're going to at least kick the tires on him. I don't know how far down the road it will go. Bear in the big greenhouse, are Jacks included in the linebacker room, or do they manage them 100% separately? It feels like Star is part of the safeties coach's room.
Right, yeah, no, Jacks are completely separate from linebackers. If anything, they run more drills that are kind of tailored towards defensive line than interior linebacker. So if you're asking, does Dave Aranda play a huge part in the Jacks? The answer is no. And actually, typically the Jacks are off doing their own thing with Caleb Collins for a lot of it. But I do think you'll see more mix and matching this year if they run the peso package a lot more. The star position is far more utilized with the safeties than with the linebackers as well.
And Bear in the Big Greenhouse also adds, my ask comes from the expectation of improvement in that position. Should we look at them as same position coach, same expectation, or should we expect better performance because Aranda and Chaney will do some more coaching in practice?
So I think he's referring to the Jacks, right? Still, okay, so basically what I saw this offseason is when they did split things up, Aranda was with the Mikes and Jamar Chaney was with the Wills, but they are exclusively working with the linebackers. And obviously those two groups practice the entire time together. But that is the group that Aranda and Chaney are working with. Chaney did coach outside linebackers at Western Kentucky, which is interesting. I guess I'll drop a little nugget there. Jaquez Evans, the Western Kentucky transfer at outside linebacker, was a guy that Baylor somewhat had interested in. He entered the portal a while ago. He'll be on campus, so that's an interesting one, I feel like. But Jamar Chaney recruited him, but he is not coaching Jacks right now.
All right. Hopefully, Bear in the Big Greenhouse, that answers your question. And if not, just circle back and we'll try and get more clarity, but I think we got it.
Yeah, and I do want to mention, I think the improvement at Jack is bringing in more talent. So like Steve Lenton, having Garmin Randolph develop, if they bring in Jaquez Evans and now you have another Jack, that's kind of where you're seeing that group potentially improve, but it won't come from a change in the coaching there. That is Caleb Collins' group.
All right, and now Wyatt Smith. Quick questions. Who would you like to see us flip as a 25 quarterback recruit?
Keelan Russell, the quarterback at SMU, I think is the most obvious one, and he's going to be the one that would be the toughest to land. I mean, he is a really, really good prospect and a guy that a lot of programs are trying to flip. I think he would be the one if you're asking me who would I want.
Who will be the next 25 prospect to commit?
Well, they're going to have 4 visitors this weekend, so if you're able to land one, I guess that would probably be where I would go to next. So maybe La Cueva, offensive lineman Mark Handy would, I guess, be my initial guess if I were to throw one out there. The other ones I think will wait till their official visits in June. So I think he's the most realistic, being super quick.
Who in the transfer portal would be a realistic game changer that we could get?
I mean, there's a bunch.
Yeah.
I mean, I mentioned Jaquez Evans is kind of one that would be great, I think, for them. Provides a safe floor, gives them a guy that has a lot of experience, a lot of proven production, which they don't really have with Steve Lenton. So he's kind of the complete opposite there. As far as a prospect goes, there's nose tackles that I know they're looking at. There's offensive linemen I know they're looking at that would be good, really good prospects. They offered Savion Washington at Colorado. He'd be an interesting one. I think they're working on a few others potentially offering there. So there are game changers. And I know a lot of people are going to say, well, they weren't great at their last spot. And that's awesome. That's awesome to say that, but they could be better at Baylor than they were at their previous spot. I also think you got to look a little deeper than, what did this guy do at another spot and where did he play at another spot when you're trying to compare how he'll do at Baylor. I think there are reasons to say, oh, maybe he fits Baylor's scheme better than what he did his last spot, things like that. I think there are a lot of game changers. I think people are drastically underselling how much the transfer portal can impact a roster. And if Baylor does add some more spots, and then if they're able to add more guys, I do think it gives them a better chance at being successful this next year.
All right, final question of the mailbag this week, also from Wyatt Smith. Hear anything on Christian Brathwaite? Do you reach out personally to them to check in or wait for a source to let you know?
Certain prospects I reach out to if I have a relationship with them. Certain ones I wait for a source. So it's kind of a mix and match there. I do think that Baylor has interest in Christian Brathwaite if that's the overarching question.
Yeah, I mean, have you heard anything? I mean, nothing specific, anything specific like that will be over on the premium section. But, yeah, I think it'd be wise to expect there's going to be some communication back and forth, and we'll see what level of interest there is. But I definitely expect there will be some level of interest given he was a commit, given the connections and all of that, the need. He would make a lot of sense. So stay tuned on that front, along with others as the portal starts to pick back up, and we know that they're on the hunt, but so is every other school in America. So it's going to be, like anything else, highly competitive to land the better players, but just got to find the right fits. And now we've seen some attrition as we expected with the wide receiver spot. There will be more as well throughout the team, but to what extent, we'll see. Quarterback decision, we'll see, although that's around the corner as well. So a lot going on all across campus, as we've been able to highlight, I think, pretty well throughout this episode, from basketball to football to baseball to softball, all points in between. That's going to about do it, though, for this episode. Grayson, what do you have before we head on out the door here?
I mean, things are going to get really wild with the transfer portal coming up this weekend and going forward. So be sure to check out the premium side for everything on that. It's going to be really interesting, and basketball as well. I mean, we got all kinds of content on the premium side, so be sure to check that out.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to feel like a Texas fan or an Ohio State fan, how they feel when they're dealing in the portal, go watch Baylor in basketball in the portal. That's the closest it's going to come to, like, having that feel of you can go in and get anybody you want, or have an opportunity to get anybody you want. Football, very much a work in progress in that regard, but basketball, as you saw with the Jeremy Roach pickup as quickly as they got him, like, they're very much in the mix for some big-time players. So a lot of fun to be had following along with that conversation and that reorganizing of the roster through the transfer portal. So, man, a lot to talk about and continue to talk about over the coming weeks. Head on over to sikkim365.com to get deeper into those conversations and to get all the latest news and insight and speculation and everything else revolving around Baylor Athletics. And if you're watching us live on the Baylor Athletics on Sikkim365 YouTube page right now, please hit that like and subscribe button. We would certainly appreciate that. We're live Tuesdays at 11:15. And also, wherever you're listening after the fact, if you do, on your favorite podcast network, hit the 5 stars. We'd love that. Or subscribe. That'd be great as well. That goes a lot longer. You hear it in, like, every podcast, but there's a reason why. It's because it matters to add subscribers and do all of that. So if you haven't, we'd appreciate the support. But for Garrett Ross behind the scenes, as always, great job. And for Grayson Grundhoefer, a lot of news that we rolled through, and there will certainly be a lot more next week. We'll talk to you then. Until next time, this has been the Bearcast on Sikkim365.com.